Righty, here we go. Welcome, 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 everybody. A bit of a different intro. Good morning. All right, it's gonna be pretty awesome here. So we've got the BC elections final debate, from my understanding. Voting is concluded on October 19th, so 11 days from now. We've got a late night debate. It starts in a few minutes here. This is gonna be pretty insane. I don't believe there's been a hold on a second. I don't believe there's been a conservative British Columbia party in like a very, very long time, and so this is very exciting because John Rustad came out of nowhere. Like the BC Conservative Party came out of nowhere. They were almost inactive, from my understanding, for a little bit of time here. And no, I don't have coffee right now. Are you kidding me? I'll be up all night, man. I'm an old man. I don't think the BC Conservative Party has been active, or they've been active. They just kind of been idling for many, many years. Not to sound too much like I don't know what I'm talking about, but when it comes to this, I'm still kind of iffy. But nonetheless, I don't ever focus on provincial. That's kind of what's so exciting about this. I don't ever focus on provincial matters, but this is so important that I just feel the need to focus on it, especially with the fact that, you know, I've never voted, and my first ever vote is going to be for I guess it's not for John Rustad. I've found that out by talking to a friend over the phone. Like when I go to vote for the BC Conservative Party, it's not for John Rustad. It's for my local riding. So that's a fun fact. Yeah, that's new information for somebody who's never voted. A little embarrassing, but nonetheless, this is gonna be pretty exciting. So buckle up, get your smokes, get your jokes, get your coffee ready, get your dinner ready. I think my dinner's gonna be ready in about like 20 minutes or something. My wife's making some chili and sourdough. Yeah, sourdough. So I'll obviously mute my mic when I have to eat. But yeah, homemade sourdough. I think it's our first time ever doing it. Okay, we're gonna be starting the debate here. Oh yeah, the BC Conservatives, they only have 8 seats in the legislature. So this is what's so crazy, is like they are the complete underdogs. They're all odds are against the BC Conservatives, right? They are coming in this thing as nobodies essentially, and all of the talking points are phenomenal. Like I've met John Rustad at a rally, right? Not privately, and I didn't even talk really one-on-one with him. I accidentally met him when I was looking for the bathroom, and so I went to the back of the rally, and he was that was like a staging area for the campaign, and then I was trying to look for the bathroom. He's like, "Hey, are you lost?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think so. Wow, we're here to see you." And he's like, "Yeah," and he shook my hand, and so there you go, right? There you go. So I've met him. I've listened to him for about an hour and a bit at a rally, and phenomenal talking points. He's his own entity. I would say I don't even know if he's a little bit more conservative, I feel like, than Pierre Poilievre and the Federal Conservative Party, which is really awesome because BC has been pushed and shoved into this NDP radical liberal province here politically, and we're absolutely freaking fed up with it, and so this is very, very exciting, folks. Okay, here we go. We're going to be starting. So get your likes in, and without further ado, let's get going here.
With me, the leaders, John Rustad of the BC Conservative Party, David Eby of the BC...
Boo!
And Sonia Furstenau of the BC Greens.
Boo!
Coming to you tonight from the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Leaders, welcome. Hi. Several weeks ago, you were presented with and agreed to tonight's format and the rules for this debate. Neither the topics nor the questions have been shared with you or your teams in advance. Tonight, you will be facing individual questions. You'll also have the opportunity to engage with one another during periods of open debate. And just before we begin, a few words from me to you. Please remember your audience this evening.
It's neck to neck.
Columbia, many of
It's
whom are
neck to
engaging
neck,
for the
folks.
first time tonight by
The latest
watching
polls,
and listening to you.
51 the
Let's give a
NDP,
vigorous but respectful
41
debate
Conservatives,
when everyone can hear
and 1 for
and
Green.
understand.
She's not even serious. Get rid of her.
Questions
huh?
have been
Shoo.
designed to challenge you and bring out the best responses you have. So please answer them. Okay, ready to debate?
Ready.
Okay. So, our first topic tonight is leadership, and our first question goes to Mr. Eby. Mr. Eby, when your predecessor, John Horgan, stepped down, he left you with a $6 billion budget surplus. Your premiership has been marked by more spending, yet people are still struggling to see improvements in public safety,
You gave it all to the homeless
affordability.
with drugs.
How much longer do British Columbians have to wait before they start to see things improve under your government?
Thanks for the question, Shachi, and good evening, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'd also like to say a special thank you to the Vancouver Canucks for starting their season tomorrow instead of tonight, so that you could join us for this important discussion about where our province is going and how we can provide support for you.
You're standing on Sugan D's nuts territory, David Eby.
Right now, huge strain from rising interest rates, global inflation driving up the cost of pretty much everything. I mean, the cost of food is a topic in the American presidential debate. And that's having an impact on the provincial budget, too. You can see that impact on the ability of government to spend. And so the question that you're going to hear answers to tonight is now the time that people need support more than ever?
No, dude.
Or is now the time to cut back?
Yes.
To reduce services? And I believe that people need support now through things like our middle income tax cut, through affordable childcare and car insurance. We started this work, Shachi, as you said, under John Horgan, and we haven't stopped. And we can't stop because people need more support than ever to deal with the challenges they're facing today.
Thank you, Mr. Eby. Next question to you, Mr. Rustad. More than half of British Columbians say that you are too extreme in your views to be premier. You've expressed discomfort with sex education curriculum. You've said you regret taking the COVID vaccine. You suggested on a podcast that carbon emissions aren't a problem for carbon-based beings. How can you convince everyone in this province that you have the judgment and the temperament to be premier for all British Columbians?
Well, thank you very much for the question, and thanks everybody for tuning in as well. I think it's important to think about where we are as a province with what's going on. There are many things that people are concerned about in BC. There's many things that have been said about me as a leader. And I can tell you something, as the Conservative Party of British Columbia, we are laser focused on the people of this province. 1 in 3 people are thinking about leaving this province.
Yeah.
1 in 2 youth can't see a future by staying in British Columbia. This, to me, is what needs to change. As a government, a Conservative Party will make sure that we're laser focused on people, on making sure that we meet their needs. There are many issues that people raise, but I tell you, when I go across this province, whether it's in Vancouver Island, or whether it's the Lower Mainland, or whether it's the North or the Okanagan, it's the same issue. People are struggling to put food on the table. That's why we come forward with cutting the carbon tax. That'll save $1,200 per family in a year. That's why we've put forward the Rustad rebate to reduce the burden of whether you're renting or paying a mortgage, which is $3,000 per year that will be savings. $1,800. That'll be $3,000. It's a significant amount of money to be able to help people in this province.
Thank you, Mr. Rustad. To you now, Ms. Furstenau. The size of your caucus in the legislature is down to just 2, yourself and Adam Olsen, who's chosen not to run again. Your former leader, Andrew Weaver, is endorsing the Conservatives this time. Why would voters consider the Green Party?
Good evening, and I would say that the need to consider voting for the Green Party is that we are getting a lack of leadership from the other 2 leaders. And I just want to talk about the answers they just gave. David Eby says people need help right now, but there are people working for social development, poverty reduction, being paid $40 an hour to deny $40 credits to people who need emergency groceries. When John Rustad says he's laser focused on the people, I wonder which people he's talking about, because it's certainly not people who are struggling. It's certainly not people who can't pay the rent. It's certainly not people who need help when it comes to mental health and health care. What these 2 are offering is either more of the same or back to the past with John Rustad, who's been in the legislature since 2005, who is part of the government that cut services, that cut funding to education, that took away the help and supports that people need, so that we find ourselves now 23 years downstream from a BC Liberal government and 7 years downstream from an NDP government that hasn't been willing to do enough to change things. That's why we need Greens in the legislature.
You got one seat. You're not even a serious party.
All of you, recent polling indicates that none of you have a clear lead in the public's hearts. Over the last week, British Columbia's views of you have worsened more than they've improved over the last few weeks. To the undecided voter, how do each of you differentiate yourselves from one another? Each of you will answer this question, leaders. We're going to start with you, Ms. Firstenow, then Mr. Rustad, then Mr. Eby.
The way we differentiate ourselves is that we focus on a future that BC could have. We focus on recognizing what's gotten us here, understanding the complex problems we face, the serious problems we face with affordability, with climate change, with lack of health care. And then we propose solutions that are actually going to get us out of these crises. We cannot pretend that climate change isn't real. We cannot pretend that climate change is real and the solution is to build more fossil fuel infrastructure. We have to focus on recognizing that to serve the people of BC, to serve the future of this province, we need politicians who take the role seriously and who move beyond slogans and telling us what we want to hear and recognize that we need a plan for the future. We are the only party that has a serious platform that is costed and that focuses on getting us to a much better place in this province.
Thank you to you, Mr. Rustad.
She's high on her own
Thank you very
supply.
much. And when I look at what's going on in British Columbia today, there are people dying on the streets. There are people dying on the streets, whether it's from crime or whether it's drugs. I was on my way over here, and at the corner of Robson and Hornby, there's an individual who died. And there was emergency people rushing. This person died from an overdose. This is the British Columbia that David Eby has created. Tent cities are growing all over the place. We have a crisis in healthcare. We've got a crisis in affordability. We've got a crisis in housing. What we need is a common sense plan that is going to be able to deliver for people in this province. British Columbia has all the potential you could ever want. We have all the resources that we could ever want. We've got a well-trained, well-educated population, but we're hopelessly managed. What's needed in British Columbia is a government that will tackle these issues, that will make sure we get government out of the way, and that we make sure that people can once again be proud to be British Columbia and to be able to build a future here.
Thank you, Mr. Rustad. Mr. Eby.
Thanks. There are huge challenges in our province, and they're not unique to our province.
This guy's like a
living,
BC Trudeau.
getting the doctors and nurses that we need to ensure our healthcare system delivers care
crap.
for you and your family when and where you need it. The issue of affordable housing. These are critical challenges, and we can solve these problems. In fact, we're starting to turn the corner on some of them. For example, we connected 250,000 people to a family doctor in the last year. We're going to connect another 160,000 in the next 6 months. Well, every British Columbian who wants a family doctor will be able to have one by the end of 2025 at the pace we're going right now. What you hear from John Rustad, conspiracy theories, division, cuts, it's not going to solve the problems that we face. We've got to take these problems head on, and we've got to do so much more. And we can solve these problems together.
Thank you, Mr. Eby.
Dude, you've had so much time to try and
to debate.
fix BC.
And here's how this is supposed to work.
People come here for the free drugs.
Will be on. What I would ask is that you allow each other to finish at least a first thought for the first person who starts, because somebody's got to start, and then the rest of you can jump in. So, Mr. Rustad, you're going to open this debate section. How do you respond to what you've heard so far from Mr. Eby and Ms. Firstenow?
Well, clearly when I think about British Columbia and I think about the fact that 1 in 2 youth are thinking about leaving British Columbia, that to me is a failure of leadership. It's weak leadership in British Columbia. People should be able to hope and build a dream here. Today in British Columbia, there is close to half the people that have passed because of an overdose in Canada, right here in British Columbia. It is failures of government policy. We need to make sure that we can build hope for people. We need to make sure that we can unleash our resources and our economy so that people can build that hope
It's
and
astonishing.
build that future.
It really is astonishing to hear John Rustad always talk about how many young people want to leave BC, but never talk about investing in young people, never talking about investing in education, never talk
Getting
about
drugs
investing
off
in
the streets,
making sure there's enough psychologists.
getting rid of the
counselors in our
wokeness is
schools,
investing in
never
young
talk about
people, you
ensuring that
freaking tree hugger.
university and post-secondary are affordable for people, and never talk about how we're really going to make sure that housing is affordable in this province, which is to get non-market housing in, to put vacancy control
These
in place,
people, they
to
fired
stop
their
real estate investment
lead,
trusts from driving up housing prices and rents in this province. He never
their
talks about
deputy
solutions.
leader for
He
liking
talks about
a
all the
Twitter
problems,
post or an X
and he
post.
consistently focuses on what's negative. I feel like I live in a different place from John Rustad.
Yeah, you do.
His vision of BC is
You
one
live in
that's
La La
dark
Land.
and gloomy. We need a vision of hope. If we want young people to stay here, we have to give them a reason to stay.
Shachi, we need hope and a plan. And that's what we're delivering for young people. Now, John Rustad's, he talked about his Rustad rebate. I call it the Rustad long wait. Because you don't actually get to benefit from it fully until 2029. People need support right now. It also excludes young people. If you're working and you're living with parents, if you're in a multi-generational home, you don't benefit at all from his plan. Who benefits the most? If you own a penthouse in downtown Vancouver, you benefit the most from his tax cut. But if you're sharing a home, you don't.
Dave says
That doesn't make any sense.
No interest in
Young people
actually-
need support. And, John Rustad's housing plan. Globe and Mail says it's not going to build a single unit of housing. He himself says it's not the Premier's job to ensure affordable housing. Well, that's exactly what got us into this mess.
But if
you
we
were in government,
interested-
you didn't think it was your job.
If we were concerned about that wealth, we would be taxing that wealth. There's no plan.
It's a
in
2v1.
platform. There's no conservative platform so
crap.
far. But if we were concerned about that enormous accumulation of wealth, if we were concerned about the growing inequality and the growing poverty, we would be looking at ways to actually tax some of that wealth. We have that in our platform. Silence from the NDP.
So look,
silence
it's
from the
clear what
Conservatives.
the NDP have just said and what David Eby just said. David Eby actually said the private sector has no place in housing, and that's just wrong.
Did I say that?
Yeah.
Yes, you did, Mr. Eby. The reality as well is this. We are going to cut the carbon tax by getting rid of the carbon taxes in British Columbia. That will save $1,200 for a family today. And yet David Eby, he wants to actually double the carbon tax in his next term. That is what he has said he will do. And so this is the reality we're facing in British Columbia. That is more money just in the carbon tax saving alone than what he is proposing with his taxes. And for him to come out and say that $900 right away for the Rustad rebate in terms of
It's
the
not right
rent
away, John.
and in terms of mortgages, those are
not right
people,
away.
hardworking people in British Columbia that will get that benefit right away. And I wish we could bring the whole thing in, except that the fiscal mismanagement and a $14 billion deficit being proposed by David Eby will take away the future of people.
largest
Mr. Eby, you seem to want to respond.
Well, I don't even know where to start here, Shachi. John Rustad can't get rid of the carbon tax because of the federal backstop. He also is not telling you the full story about his Rustad long wait, that you don't actually see a benefit until at the earliest 2026, and then only if you own your home or if you have high rental costs. If you're living in a rural part of British Columbia and you have
Anybody
low rent,
renting will
you see the
receive
least
a
amount of
benefit.
benefit.
Anybody
And that's why
renting
there's a
will
guy
receive
with an $80 million house in my constituency that loves John Rustad. But I'm on your side.
That's why it's
you and your
capped for
families at home
$3,000
to make sure you get
for people that
access
have
to
to work
immediate
$250,000 a year.
benefit.
Rustad's keeping his composure.
We have
Not
the largest
2 years from now, not 5 years
We
from now,
have
but
the
right away.
largest, probably
give him
most
that.
violent hurricane lining up off the coast of Florida, and we have two leaders retreating from climate action in this province.
Okay, well, leaders, that brings to a close our first
I just realized I'm
round
cutting off,
of open debate, but I
Rustad
think
here.
you'll like this. The next theme is housing
Sorry about that.
affordability, so you get to talk a little bit more about it. Housing in BC is the most expensive in North America. It's an issue that links the economy and quality of life. It links the economy to quality of life. Each of you have called it a crisis. Mr. Rustad, the first question comes to you. You say you will undo NDP policies, including rent caps, restrictions on short-term rentals, and allowing more density on single-family lots. How would removing these measures help with affordability? What is your plan for housing?
So, Sachi, thank you very much for the question. To start with, we did not say we'll remove rent caps, and we're not going to remove rent caps. That's something that's very clear to be done, that needs to be done in British Columbia. When we look at housing in this province, we have a government, David Eby, that is saying It was, first of all, it was foreigners, and then it was speculators, and then it was vacant properties, and then it was Airbnbs. Instead of pointing at the real problem, which is government, and government is getting in the way. It takes far too long to get permits in this province. It takes far too long to get housing built in this province. We're going to come to communities with $1 billion a year to be able to invest in things like water and sewer upgrades so that we can clean up the backlog that's needed, so that the investment can be there for densification. We're going to work with communities on zoning so that we can zone for densification as opposed to David Eby's approach of just overriding local governments. Working with local governments is critical because we also need to make sure local governments can get the permitting process done much faster. It's also why we're looking at using the old MERV program, the multi-unit residential buildings. This is a program that was very successful building rental units across this country. It's critical to bring that back and get the rental stock that we need built here in British Columbia. We have a plan and we will deliver on housing.
Thank you, Mr. Rustad. Mr. Eby, many people today will never be able to afford the same kind of housing their parents had. What do you say to those who feel upward mobility is no longer an option in British Columbia, that they have no choice but to lower their expectations when it comes to where and how they live?
Well, I believe that one of the foundational requirements for a decent life in our province is a good place to live, and that it's actually a core responsibility of anybody who wants to be premier. It's why I got into politics. This is what drives me, is making sure that you and your family have a good place to live. There's a strong contrast here. John Rustad explicitly said he doesn't think that it's the premier's job to help deliver affordable housing. Well, our plan will deliver 300,000 middle-income homes. That's what experts are saying. In addition, we're expediting construction by investing in modular housing construction so that housing can be built faster and cheaper. We're preserving lower cost rental housing so that a senior who sees that for sale sign go up out front of the rental building doesn't fear that they're going to end up in a shelter. These are basic things, and we're making sure to deliver for British Columbians on them. We've got so much more to do. Our plan to get people an opportunity to buy their first home, to address Airbnb, to address speculation, people leaving homes vacant in our market. It's delivered 20,000 homes for people, and John Rustad wants to get rid of all of those things. Doesn't make any sense.
Thanks, Mr.
No,
Eby.
he wants to fix the broken-ass system,
for measures to
which
cool the
rewards
market
criminals
in order
and
to
drug
make
addicts.
housing more affordable for everyone. But how do you do that without devaluing what is often a person's largest financial investment, their home?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important for us to recognize that when people can't afford to live in British Columbia, our economy is not going to be able to be strong. We are going to see ourselves further and further away from the province that we want to be. In Victoria, rents have more than doubled in the last 7 years. We're in an emergency where people can't afford to live here. And so what we are proposing is immediately put in rent caps between tenancies. This is where the rents are being jacked up in between tenancies. It's an incentive to evict. Non-market housing, we need to build tens of thousands of units of non-market housing every year to put a check on the cost, especially of rental housing. We have a median income in BC of 44,000 people, half of $44,000. Half the people in this province earn less than $44,000. They don't have an affordable place to live. It's an emergency. We can address this in a way that protects the people of British Columbia, but we have to stop protecting real estate investment trusts and investors who have made so much money off of housing in this province.
She's like a sober from alcohol Elizabeth May, but
to all of you in terms of order, we'll
on
start with
something else.
Mr. Eby, then Ms. Furstenau, then coming back to Mr. Rustad. Here is your question. The pendulum on housing policy has swung from market-driven to much more government interventionist. Nothing appears to be working. Is it time to go back to letting the market decide, or is it time for even greater government intervention? To you first, Mr. Eby.
Thanks, Chachi. There's no one solution to the housing crisis. When somebody's looking for a place to live, they're checking Craigslist for a place they can rent. They're looking at the listings and thinking, God, I'm never going to be able to afford a house. The way we got here is so many different challenges wrapped up together. We have to go after all of them. You can't just choose one. So if you're a builder, if you're a drywaller or a painter or a carpenter, you build homes. We want you out there building. to make sure that people have a chance to build a good life for themselves and their family. We don't want you tied up in endless permit processes. John Rustad's advocating. Let's get building those homes, those 300,000 middle-income homes. Sonia's right. We need to lean on the nonprofit sector. We need to have non-market housing. And we also need to be innovative, making sure, like we are with 5,000 units every year, that people can buy into market at 40% below market value, supporting them to get out of rental housing and own their first home. We've got to do all the things to support British Columbians.
Ms. Firstenow.
Perpetual debt. You'll own nothing and be happy.
Neither of these other
The Green
leaders
Party,
talk about the
they
role
want to
that
double
financial
everyone's
investors,
existing
real
property
estate investment
taxes.
trusts are playing in BC.
That's
in 20
insane.
years, 59% of rental housing was purchased by real estate investment trusts. We have global capital coming to BC, buying
He
up
does sound like
housing,
Trudeau, yeah.
and it is not being used to ensure that people have a place to live. It's being used to ensure that shareholders get their profits delivered. It's something I've been asking David Eby about since 2018, when he was Minister of Housing, when he was Attorney General. What is the province going to do to put protections around the people, as opposed to letting these investment bodies turn our housing into a commodity and use it entirely for shipping profits to shareholders, who most of whom aren't even part of BC?
Thank you, Mr. Rustad.
Thank you. I want to start off by saying is 1 in 2 youth are thinking about leaving British Columbia because they can't afford to live here and they've got no hope to buy a house. I love my wife.
I've thought about it.
I love my nieces and nephews. I miss the fact that I wasn't able to have children. But I think any parent would want to do everything they can to make sure that there's an opportunity for their kids to be able to build a future here.
He's so real.
And I will ask you this. In 7 years of NDP government, has anything been better? Is housing improved? Housing has been in a crisis. We've seen a 30% decline just this year on housing starts. When I talk to people, there are tens of thousands of housing units that have started and are now defunct, that are not going ahead in British Columbia. This is failure of policy. This is why the Conservatives have a common sense plan to unleash the potential of the private sector to build that housing, to build those rental units, to make sure that people can have a home here, to make sure that our kids can stay here in British Columbia.
Thank you, Mr. Rustad. Now time for more open debate, and we will begin this time with you, Ms. Firstenow.
John loves to talk about unleashing the private sector, which is what the BC Liberals did when he was in power, when he was part of that government in the 2000s. Unleashing the private sector means more profits for the private sector and more lack of affordability for the people in BC. John doesn't want to just unleash the private sector more in housing, which has gotten us to exactly where we are today, a housing market that is entirely run by the private sector. He wants to unleash the private sector in healthcare. He wants to put that profit margin on top of healthcare delivery. And we see what that has done in Alberta, where wait times for surgeries have gone up and numbers of surgeries have gone down and the costs have gone up. That's what unleashing the private sector looks like. That's what John Rustad wants to do.
No, include private health care.
When I look at unleashing the private sector, there's no question in my mind. You look at the housing in British Columbia, it was built by the private sector. The private sector has to play an important role. And it's not big companies, it's mom and pop, whether they're investing in a second home or whether they're building an extra unit. It is small business, it's small companies, it is large companies. We need the full mix in British Columbia. And the reality is, when I talk to people that want to build homes in this province, they say it takes too long. It takes 4 to 7 years or longer.
So then, John, why are you putting more red tape in their way? Why are you trying to undo?
No, he's not. He's trying to get rid of the red tape,
Make sure
dumbass.
that we can unleash it. And this is why we have to work with municipalities, not run roughshod over them or bully them. We need to work with municipalities to get the permitting process cleaned up. In Vancouver,
Well,
if I could just add one quick point.
We need the housing now.
In Vancouver, they have 274 bylaws associated with housing, and over 70 people have to touch a project. It's no wonder it takes years, if not a decade, to get housing
Okay, I
projects
think
built.
Mr. Eby wants to respond.
Thanks. I met Andrew, who moved into a rental place that he could afford, was close to work, used to be an Airbnb. And when we brought in our Airbnb rules, the owner converted it to long-term rental. It was him plus 2 other people moved into long-term rentals. When we brought in the speculation and vacancy tax to deal with vacant homes, people buying homes, just leaving them empty, condos and whole houses, 20,000 British Columbians moved in and started renting those homes. These initiatives work. And housing is hard right now. It's hard for people. We got to do so much more. But can you imagine how much harder it'll be in a world where there's no restriction on Airbnb rentals, where there's no speculation and vacancy tax? John Rustad's committed. He spoke against it since 2018.
That's simply not true.
And the speculators and the investors love his plans.
Mr. Eby,
but I'm on the side of you and your family.
Simply not true. The reality is
John.
Airbnbs are licensed by municipalities. Airbnbs are zoned by municipalities. They just go up anywhere. This is something that's within local governments. But once again, David Eby's approach is just to be an authoritarian. My perspective is quite simple on this. We've seen a 30% decline in housing. This year, it's anticipated there'll be less than 17,000 housing starts in British Columbia. We need to be seeing 30, 40, or 50,000 housing starts.
But John, why didn't you do that in the 16 years you were in government? We wouldn't be in this mess.
In 2017, they promised 114,000 homes, and what did they build? I think about 14,000. Now he's promising 300,000. You cannot trust David Eby to be able to deliver these numbers because...
Man, John is killing it.
That neither of them are interested in protecting the affordable housing that we have. That's vacancy control. When Bill 44 and all the housing legislation that the NDP brought out last year, when Adam Olsen spent hours and hours going back and forth with Ravi Kahlon, Ravi admitted in the end, none of these measures were going to bring affordability. So let's be clear. These two don't have a plan for affordable housing. They want to talk about housing supply. They want to talk about housing starts, but they do not want to protect the affordable housing that we have. They do not want to ensure that we are making affordable housing available to people who need it right now.
Mr. Eby.
Affordable housing is important, but it's also important for people to be able to buy a place affordably. That's why we have a proposal for 5,000 units a year to get people out of the rental market into a place at 40%
Not when they're competing with real estate
rest assured,
they're not.
if John Rustad's elected and gets rid of all of these measures,
one at a time,
it'll be
leaders.
so much harder.
All right, I'm going to give you a little bit more time, Mr. Rustad. We do have a bit of time if you want to briefly respond to that.
Sure. Clearly in British Columbia, 5,000 starts is not what we need. We need 30, 40, or 50,000 housing starts in British Columbia. This is why we have the Rustad rebate, so that your rent and your mortgage can be written off so that you get a rebate on that right away to make life more affordable for people in BC.
Okay, and we've got to keep moving. Lots more to get to, and now we are moving on to healthcare.
John is crushing it.
British Columbians either don't
But David
have
Eby
a
looks
doctor or can't
dumbfounded.
see one when they need to.
Whenever John talks.
To you, Mr. Rustad, you've committed to expanding private healthcare delivery. How can you ensure those who can't pay have the same access to the speed and standard of care as those who can?
We are committed to universal health care in British Columbia, where it's one payer, which is the government. Government pays the bill. But we have the second most expensive healthcare system, and we're getting second worst outcomes. We are in a crisis in BC. We're in a crisis. ER rooms are closed all across this province. In the city of Merritt, between now and Christmas, it's anticipated there'll be 32 more days of closure of an ER room. It could take 8, 10, 12 hours or longer to wait for emergency rooms. People have died waiting in emergency rooms. There was a lady. She was in labor. She went into the hospital, and she miscarried in the washroom and sat there covered in blood, waiting for hours for services in an emergency room. That is David Eby's healthcare in BC. And quite frankly, it really tears me apart and it makes me upset. Mm-hmm. We need to be able to make sure that we're retaining our doctors, that we're bringing back the healthcare workers that were let go. We need to make sure we have a model in this province where doctors want to stay here and work, where people can come in and we can unleash the full potential of family doctors. We need to be able to make sure we deal with training and the people coming into our province. There's so much that needs to be done on healthcare, and it's not happening under David Eby.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rustad. To you, Mr. Eby, third-party delivery exists in Australia, in the UK, in Germany, and it's already here in British Columbia. In coming out so strongly against alternative care models, including privatization, are you putting ideology above the needs of British Columbians?
No, not at all, Shachi. When people need care, we're going to make sure we're doing everything we can to deliver care. That story that John just told is horrific. Every British Columbian deserves high-quality care no matter where you are in the province. People who are, when we weren't hitting cancer treatment timelines, we reached down to Bellingham and we retained a private clinic to be able to make sure that people were getting the care that they need. It's not about ideology. We have a shortage of healthcare workers. We've got to train up more healthcare workers. We've got to recognize the credentials of those healthcare workers who want to work in our province from other parts of Canada, from other countries. We're leading the country in recruiting healthcare professionals. We've got to do more. And I'll tell you, we're not going to get there by cutting the healthcare system. As John Rustad's proposal, he keeps releasing numbers consistent with cutting billions of dollars from our healthcare system. He hasn't released his costed platform. We got to hire more doctors and nurses. We can't be competing with the private sector who's going to pay those same doctors and nurses more. And then all of a sudden, you have to pay more to access those doctors and nurses. That's why we're opening a new medical school in Surrey to train up community healthcare workers, doctors and nurses to work across BC, incentives for working in rural BC, and provisional license so those professionals can get to work right away.
Thanks, Mr. Eby. Ms. Furstenau, you've described the current healthcare system as a bloated bureaucracy. You're also campaigning on establishing an integrated community health center in every riding in British Columbia. So how exactly do you plan to do that without adding to said health bureaucracy?
Well, the great thing about community health centers is that they don't actually need heavy bureaucracy on top of them the way that UPCCs, the invention of the NDP, do. The NDP seem to have approached healthcare with the idea that there's nothing that one more VP and 7 more project managers can't solve, when in fact what we have to do is ensure that healthcare spending is being focused on the delivery of healthcare by the professionals who were trained to do it, healthcare professionals in our province. We've seen the corporatization of healthcare under the NDP. We've seen the growth of TELUS, Health Plus. They were investigated only because the BC Greens wouldn't relent on asking the questions of why they were allowed to double bill. We've seen the growth of agency nurses. We see that both of these two parties are aligned on corporate delivery of healthcare, whereas with community health centers, you treat it like we treat the public education system. There's the infrastructure, the doctors, the nurse practitioners, nurses, allied health professionals build their team. We have 30 of these operating in BC already. They're hugely successful. We can get 93 up and running because it's the model that we use for our MLA offices. It's totally possible.
Thank you, Ms. Furstenau. Same question to all of you now, starting again with Ms. Furstenau, then Mr. Rustad, then Mr. Eby. Here's your question. The super senior wave is here. People 85 and older represent one of the fastest growing age groups in British Columbia. Options for long-term palliative or in-home care are often limited. Many people have no help. Others can only rely on their children or neighbors. What is your plan, Ms. Furstenau, first to ensure the dignity and care to those who have given so much to this province?
Yeah, you know, we've had a shortage of long-term thinking. We've had a shortage of governments who look at demographics, who prepare for what's coming, who try to avert crises. And now we are seeing a lot of people, a lot of seniors who aren't getting the care they need. We had the report from the Seniors Advocate, A Billion Reasons to Care, that showed a huge amount of public funding going to especially for-profit seniors care, where that money wasn't being used for delivery of care to service to seniors. It was being used for administration. It was being used for renovations. And so number one, we need a government that takes seriously how public money is being used to support seniors, and we need to make sure that that is being used properly. And number two, we have to find ways to support seniors at home. The best place for seniors to age is age in place. And it's horrifying right now, the story that a 95-year-old man has been evicted from his home to a hospital.
Mr. Rustad.
Thank you, and I need to clear the air here. We're going to be adding about $3.8 billion in healthcare spending over the next 3 years. David Eby continues to perpetuate a lie, and I just wanted to be clear on that. When it comes to seniors and what needs to be done with seniors care in this province, we've laid out a very comprehensive plan. Everything from building more long-term care facilities in this province, a commitment of 5,000 new beds, but more than that, we need to work with seniors and we need to work with families to be able to support them at home. That's why we're going to create tax credits that are available. We're going to expand services at home. A nurse came to me in my riding and she told me this story, and she comes home in tears because she's been going out and she's talking to seniors and they're saying, can we please get some help? And she's saying, there's none available. I'm so sorry. That is wrong. Seniors need to be treated with respect. We need to work to be able to support them at home, because we know that's where the best outcomes are. There's much more we need to do. We're expanding the SAFER program, shelter aid for elderly residents. There's a lot more that can be done, and that we have a plan to be able to deliver.
Mr. Eby.
Well, you know, it's hard to listen to John Rustad. He was in government for 16 years.
Come on,
Seniors
dude.
who lived in long-term care homes didn't get a bath once a week. The vast majority of long-term care homes didn't meet even minimum provincial standards for care and dignity. And now he says, oh, if you send me back, I'm going to be different this time. I'm not going to cut the healthcare system. I'm not going to fire the workers who care for the seniors. The largest firing of healthcare workers happened when John Rustad was in government, and he voted for it against seniors. You deserve care at home for as long as you can be at home. That's why we've expanded home care. Our hospital at home program means you can get hospital-like care at home in BC, the first time in our province. And we've got a lot more to do, but we're meeting standards for seniors in long-term care, and we're going to keep doing that, something John Rustad never did.
So we're throwing to open debate. We're starting with Mr. Rustad. Do you want to respond to what Mr. Eby just said?
I mean, first of all, what David Eby just said is not true.
90% of care homes didn't meet standards.
And I can tell you something: the care homes that were built and that were renovated in
Come on, John.
were renovated to the standards of the day. They were good quality facilities that were built. But here's the real key in my mind.
for other people,
when you look forward at what needs to happen going forward, David Eby cannot defend the record that he has and the damage that is being done in BC, especially for seniors. Seniors need that respect and care. They can't get...
It's been a shit show under Eby.
Emergency rooms closed. Does a senior have to go an hour and a half, 2.5 hours down the road for the next one? And that is David Eby's record. We need to make sure that those services are there and available. We also need to make sure that we're coming into their homes, providing support, and working with families to make sure that support's there.
Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, when we were all rolling up our sleeves to get vaccines to protect vulnerable seniors.
Oh, here we go.
When Bonnie Henry was working night and day to keep us safe during the pandemic, you know, John Rustad and his candidates were providing donations to people who were protesting outside of hospitals, anti-vax convoy members. He's still an anti-vaxxer. He appeared in front of a group of people that called the so-called, you called it the so-called COVID vaccine. You said you wish you'd never been vaccinated.
That doesn't mean you're
Someone said,
anti.
"You think that public
It means
health professionals
you just regret
should be
taking the
tried
singular
like
one."
Nazi war criminals.
That's
you
not
said, well,
true.
we wouldn't do that in
No.
BC, but we would support an international effort to do
So
that,
look,
John.
it's
It's
clear-
embarrassing. You know, I wouldn't fire Bonnie Henry. I'm trying to hire you and your family a family doctor. We've connected 250,000 people to family doctors. We've got so much more to do.
He's
But if you
just
think
so
that we'll be safer
disgustingly
in our
like the
province with
Trudeau of
someone who
BC.
doesn't
Mr. Rustad,
vaccines,
respond.
Thank you very
in
much.
charge of things.
Let Mr.
Thank you,
let him
thank you very
respond.
much, Sachi. The reality is I'm triple vaccinated. The reality is in British Columbia, I also promoted and supported people getting vaccines, especially for seniors in our communities. I was supportive of that. However, I am not anti-vax. I am anti-mandate. I believe that people should have choice. It shouldn't be thrust upon them and forced upon them or coerced to be able to take a vaccine.
You never know which John Rustad's going to show
make
up.
sure-
Look at- when
When he's
I talk
talking to
seniors-
supporters,
He's triple. He got 3 doses and they're calling him anti.
Not to you.
That doesn't even make any
These
sense.
two are door knocking, but I am, and I'm talking to a lot of seniors in Victoria. And what I hear from seniors are the concerns that they have around losing their affordable housing. That is the number one concern I've heard from seniors. And then I hear from seniors who don't have access to primary care. And what these two are not focused on is protecting that affordable housing, protecting that right to live and age in place that seniors want to have after having contributed to our society, paid their taxes their whole life. They want a government that is going to have their back. And that's not what they feel right now. And then they want to make sure that they do have primary care. And what has not happened under the NDP is the solutions to the primary care crisis. UPCCs are twice as expensive as meeting a family doctor, and they do not work to solve this crisis. There's one really important factor. They'll keep talking about, we're going to get more doctors, we're going to train more doctors. BC has more family doctors per capita than the rest of the country. They're just not willing to work in this broken system. We want to make a primary public healthcare system
So look,
that
it's
doctors
clear
want to
in my
work in,
mind
that
that
healthcare professionals want to work in, and that will serve the people of
It's
BC.
clear in my mind
There's
that
a
keeping
great
seniors-
desire for both these leaders to come back in.
Clear in my mind that keeping seniors at home as best we can and support them is the right thing to do. In 2022, I lost my father, I lost my father-in-law, and I lost my mother in that year. But we were able to keep them in their home right to the end because we were able to support with family. There was not the level of care, unfortunately, for many, many seniors that are out there to be able to do that. And we know that when seniors can stay in their home, their quality of life is much better. And for me, we were able to provide that quality of life for my parents. But I know many families can't. And that's where we need to be able to make sure we're supporting those families to be able to stay in their homes.
Okay, I'm going to allow you to come back in, Mr. Eby, and I'll give you a little bit more time.
Thanks. These are huge challenges that we face in our healthcare system. You know, when John Rustad was in government in 2010, they said, we're going to make sure everyone gets a GP. A GP for me, the program they called it. 5 years later, fewer people had a family doctor than when the program started. We're actually making progress on getting people family doctors. We're supporting you and your family. And we believe in the science of things like vaccines. We don't have a candidate that says the vaccines give you AIDS. We don't support anti-vax convoy members. We believe that science works and it keeps us safe with things like vaccinations.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Eby. We're now moving on to our next section, which is the opioid crisis and public safety. It has been the better part of a decade since BC first declared a public health emergency over drug-related deaths.
This is so frustrating.
People
They're
die,
so
and on
desperate.
average, between
Oh my
6
goodness.
and 7 people die every day. My first question
EB is
to
done.
Ms. Furstenau, you plan to continue safe supply. You talk about prevention and reducing
my
stigma.
God.
But how do you tell people, especially young people,
Safe supply
about
is just
the
a
risks
freaking
of
waste.
using hard drugs while simultaneously trying to destigmatize?
Yeah, it's really important that young people get good information, they get reliable
Good drugs from the
information.
government.
We've seen in programs in the United States, in middle schools, in high schools, where when young people get the information that
Reminder to
gives
smash the
them
like button if you haven't
everything
yet,
they need
folks.
to know about the risks and dangers, especially of opioids and hard drugs, there's a 66% decline in use amongst young people. That's what we should be aiming for. The other thing that young people need, and I had a friend of mine who's 18 reading me some statistics this afternoon saying that girls are saying that their mental health is worse than it's ever been. We need counselors in schools. We need enough EAs in schools. Kids need to feel supported in their schools. Prevention is critical. But it's interesting that David Eby says he listens to Bonnie Henry when it comes to COVID and when it comes to that public health emergency, but he rejects her advice when it comes to this public health emergency that has claimed 15,000 people's lives. There needs to be a regulated pharmaceutical alternative to the toxic drugs that are being distributed by organized crime in our streets, and that's the advice from the provincial health officer to this government.
Okay, that's time. Thank you, Ms. Furstenau. To you, Mr. Rustad. As you know, homelessness and addiction often go hand in hand. You say you'll clear tent encampments. You say you won't hesitate to close overdose prevention sites. Instead, you're focusing on drug-free housing, which currently does not exist at the scale you would need. Won't your policies simply drive more vulnerable people into the streets?
There's no question when you look at this crisis of overdoses and drug addictions in British Columbia, it is horrendous.
Tell them about the Campbell River.
Last year, just over 5,700 people died in Canada. Close to half of those were in British Columbia, 2,500 people in British Columbia alone. Clearly what that means is the policies in this province are not working. If you look at any other province by any other measure, they are performing better than we are in British Columbia. So we need to take a different approach. We need to make sure that we bring an end to decriminalization and safe supply. We need to bring an end to this, to the government being a drug dealer, quite frankly. What we need to do in British Columbia is build out recovery. And yes, you're right, there is significant investment that's needed, and we're going to make those investments. Everything from doctor-prescribed treatment to short-term recovery, to longer-term recovery, and to involuntary, compassionate recovery. These are things that need to be done. We're going to build out this capacity. But I'll tell you the story of Christian, who was a 13-year-old and when he was first addicted and not told by his parents did everything they possibly could to try to get help for him. He eventually passed away when he was 28. And when I talked to the mom said, I asked the government to try to help me and they refused. They didn't even answer the phone.
That's time. Okay, Mr.
I wish he
thank
talked
you.
about the
I
Campbell
am
River
going to
experience.
Come back around and invite you to answer the substance of the question. We've heard you.
I heard it at a
things that
rally.
need
It's
to be
insane.
Done. I heard that. However, as we pointed out in the question, the capacity that you're talking about does not meet the scale at this time. In closing tent encampments, in closing safe consumption sites and other use sites, are you not driving drug-addicted people back into the streets? Where exactly do you expect them to go? I will give you 30 seconds to respond.
Thank you.
They're still in the streets.
Sure that there's three distinct groups. There's those that are down on their luck. There's those that have addictions and those that have mental health. We need to make sure that we have housing.
Ship them to
available for
Ottawa.
those people that need
Ship
it.
them to Ottawa.
When we have
Ship them to Ottawa.
we need to make sure that we deal with detox, get them into a place where we can put them in housing for recovery and make sure we have that. It needs to be built out. And of course, with mental health, we have to make sure those supports are there. And I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to talk more about that in the future.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Eby, in the 7 years your government has been in power, people around British Columbia have seen their communities scarred by the toxic drug and mental health crises. Tent cities and street crime have become common. How do you respond to those who say your policies, including the experiment to
This is why I couldn't be a
decriminalize
politician, because I
public
just want to
drug
ship them to Ottawa.
consumption, have only made things worse?
Yeah, this is a really awful crisis. I listened to the story of Christian.
You
struggling with
caused
his
the
parents,
crisis.
to get him support. Anyone who's lost a child or a parent or a loved one or a friend, and there are so many
It's
people.
to
and
you to
very few
blame,
people
you
haven't been directly
piece of
affected
crap.
by this, knows the scale of the human tragedy and that it's urgent. And it's led us to try things that were unimaginable at certain points. Who would have imagined that there would be an all-party committee and the police chiefs lining up, say, let's try decriminalization. Let's try removing stigma so that people can come forward and ask for help. They don't worry about getting arrested or losing their job. And so we tried it, and it didn't produce the results that anybody wanted. Instead of people feeling like they could come forward, people struggling with brain injuries, mental health issues, and addictions felt like they could use drugs anywhere in the province. So we had to change course. This is a hard problem. It won't be solved with simple slogans. We got to do this. We actually need to take on this problem.
Just like Trudeau.
We have opened hundreds of new treatment beds. We're providing support for youth like Christian, Vancouver Island, the Orca Lalem site. We've got so much more to do. And we'll do everything it takes to make sure that we're supporting people in recovery however we can.
Thank you, Mr. Eby. Same question to all of you. Throughout this campaign, you've been largely focused on what to do once toxic drugs are already in our communities. To each of you, what is your plan to address the role of organized crime and the constant flow of drugs through our ports and other places? We begin with Mr. Rustad, then Mr. Eby, finally Ms. Furstenau.
Thank you. There's no question in my mind that our ports are wide open. The German report has said that less than 1% of containers in the British Columbia are actually checked. The federal government
Scan the
exited
cans.
scene in 1997, and the problem has only gotten worse under David Eby. And I suggested, and I still move forward, the plan that we are going to strengthen our port police. We're going to actually make sure that that force is there and available to be able to do that work. David Eby said, oh, you can't do that. It's federal. Watch us. We're going to make sure that we crack down on these ports. We're going to bring an end to the organized crime, the drugs and the guns that are coming through our ports. We're going to help work with the federal government to strengthen our borders right around. We're going to do everything we can to actually even go after the components that go into making these drugs so that we can get these dangerous drugs off our streets. They're killing people on a regular basis. This needs to happen, and a Conservative government's going to make sure that we put the resources there to end our ports being wide open and to bring an end to this crisis.
Hell yeah.
Thanks, Shachi. You know, again, difficult to listen to John Rustad on this critically important issue of organized crime in our province. You know, when John was in government, gangsters brought hockey bags full of unmarked bills to BC casinos. They laundered money with impunity. They used our court system to enforce those same gambling debts. The government had no interest in taking that on. And now John Rustad has actually announced that he's not even going to enforce federal gun laws in British Columbia. He's going to direct the police, and this isn't just one time or twice, it's 3 times, including in the radio debate we participated in. He will direct the police not to enforce federal gun laws that prevent abusers from accessing guns, that prevent gangsters from buying and selling handguns and semi-automatic weapons.
Gangsters don't buy legal guns, you dumbass.
Give me a break. John, you have to go with the gangsters. You have to take their cars and their houses and their guns and enforce the law, and that's what we're going to do.
I just see him flicking his
I
wrist.
think one of the problems we have is that
I'm sorry, guys. I'm
people are
sorry.
being abandoned.
Oh, he's so feminine.
Homelessness, there isn't solutions for them. Mayors are asking, the provincial government have been asking the provincial government to step up and play the role that they're supposed to play, to have a social safety net, to ensure that people aren't living outside and gathered in an area where it's very easy for organized crime to find them and to sell them substances that are very dangerous and often deadly. We have an example in Duncan. 4 years it's been operating. It's been a proven success model. It's the village site. It gets people into homes. It gets them wraparound services. It gets them connection, belonging, community, employment, and it keeps them away from organized crime. This is what should be scaled up everywhere in this province. This is how we solve this crisis.
Thank you. And now time for open debate. Mr. Eby, we'll start with you.
Thanks. I think it's critically important on an issue as challenging as the toxic drug crisis to be frank with British Columbians. We're going to have to try different things. We're going to have to do different things to get at this and provide people the support.
Why haven't you tried new things then?
It's not okay to play politics with it, John. It's
They
not okay
fucked
to say
the
to one
system up.
community when you're in Richmond to the Chinese community, we're going to
Then it comes time to re-election.
sites. We're going to close them, the drug dens you called them.
And then they promise to
later
do new
on you
things.
Say, well, actually, we're not going to close them. We're just going to change the name. And then your critic, Eleanor Sturko, comes out and she says, well, actually, we're going to expand them. We're going to put additional services. People need to know what the plan is. These are hard issues. Lives are on the line. This is not a simple fix. It's not solved with a tweet, and it's sure not solved by pretending to one community
we
instead
keep
of
hearing
the
about
rest of them head
parents.
on.
Ms. First to
We
know,
keep
then Mr.
hearing from both John and David, and as an MLA, from parents who say exactly what we're hearing. I needed to get help for my child. My child needed mental health support. My child was in crisis. I couldn't find anything. There's one child psychiatrist in all of Cowichan. We are not creating a voluntary care system. We are not creating a mental health care system that meets people's needs before they're in crisis. And we don't have a plan from either of these two leaders to ensure that people have access to psychologists under MSP, which is something we've been pushing for 3 years, that people have access to child psychologists, that kids know that the counselors are there for them, so that we are avoiding these terrible crises that kids are finding themselves in, and parents saying, I can't find
British
help for my
Columbia,
child.
She's with the
In
NDP.
British Columbia, David Eby has had 7 years. And what has the results been? We have seen, for example, in Surrey,
Farkle.
where people are being blackmailed and threatened on a regular
That's the
basis.
results.
We're seeing gangs and gang activity happening at an extraordinary level. People
Look
being
at
killed by these gangs.
Eby.
We have not seen any action.
I saw in the comments someone said he looks like Woody from Toy
We
Story.
have seen in some of these safe supply locations, we have actually seen people arrested and distributing drugs
This
in
shit's
those
funny.
facilities. These sort of things need to be shut down when that happens. We have to have a zero tolerance policy for this type of an approach in British Columbia. He has done
Safe
nothing.
supply
He has
locations. I
not
don't
even
know what you're
addressed
talking
the
about.
facilities where there was a problem like that. And
even
the
know what you're
police
talking
had to
about.
go in and seize the drugs and arrest people.
British Columbians need
I
to
just
know
finished watching
where you
all the
stand.
Toy Stories with my
You
kids.
go and you call them drug dens and you say, I'm going to close all the overdose
Oh my
prevention
God.
sites to one community, and then you go to another
Police-
community.
Oh, that's funny.
And
When
people
you're
there
talking to
selling
guy,
drugs.
when you're talking to a guy whose life was
People
saved 5
selling
times, let me
drugs in
finish,
those
John. This
facilities?
is important. When you're talking to a guy whose life was saved 5 times at an overdose prevention site, and you tell him, actually, don't worry, we're not going to close them, we're just going to change the name. That kind of disingenuous politics is exactly what we don't need in the
What
toxic
we
drug
need
crisis.
to be doing here is where you have somebody who ODs and is brought back to life. Clearly, they are not making the right decisions for themselves. We need, as a government, to be able to be compassionate about it and get them into treatment.
These
Get
two
them
want to
into
focus
involuntary
on
treatment
people
so that
not
they
being
can
served
be able
by
to
the
recover.
systems that should have prevented these crises. These two want to focus on the worst place that people can be in crisis: homeless, in despair. using substances that are so dangerous. What they don't want to focus on
Using
is
substances
the
provided
lack
by
of
the government.
investment under the BC Liberals.
What the hell?
The cutting back of services that got us here. And they don't want to focus on the fact that for the last 7 years, the NDP have not responded to this crisis in a way that actually averts it. I want us to have a war on poverty. I want us to address the social conditions that are creating these outcomes. I want us to make sure that in BC, we don't have Lamborghinis driving down a road where people are living on the streets. These are solvable problems. We just haven't had the political will to either prevent them or solve them.
Yeah, it's an eyesore for the Lamborghinis.
Right? We
Get the
do
people off the road so the Lamborghinis can go.
Don't go down this path.
Lambo's
as
lives
much as
matter.
Possible. It's part of our commitment and the work we're doing in our education system to expand access to educational assistants and counselors in every single school to intervene early.
One
we know that
counselor
if
per
we
school is not going to cut it. One counselor per school is not. I've been in schools. When you have a population of 1,500 kids in one school,
Sachi.
one counselor is not enough. We need counselors there for kids when they need them.
Leaders, I do have to keep us to time, and that is time for this section. Our next theme deals with Indigenous rights and land use. Earlier this year, the province paused amendments to the Land Act, which would have shared decision-making powers with First Nations. The first question is to you, Mr. Eby. Your proposed Land Act changes have faced criticism over impacts on individual land rights, treaty negotiations, and major resource developments, including those supported by First Nations. If you win this election, will you again attempt to amend the Land Act?
No, we won't, Sonia. And the reason is that we need to make sure that we have the confidence of British Columbians in doing this critically important work. We can't spend a bunch of money on lawyers fighting Indigenous people in court all the way through to the Supreme Court of Canada and back and forth. We're not ending up any further ahead. It brings uncertainty, it brings a loss of investment, and it brings a lack of improvement in conditions for First Nations people in the province. We've got to work in partnership. I'm very frank about that because I know that when we work with Indigenous people, we lift the conditions for Indigenous people across the province in BC, but we also improve the lives of the regions around them. And so when I think about mining, for example, in the Northwest, the Tahltan, major mine under construction right now, 1,800 jobs. It's a cooperative partnership between the Tahltan and the mining company. It's the future in the province, not fighting in court. And what John Rustad is doing, spreading division. Some of his candidates openly racist to Indigenous people.
No, they're not.
Denying the history of residential schools. Paul Rashford in my own constituency on Orange Shirt Day, saying he won't wear an orange shirt because he won't misrepresent Canadian history. These are the kind of candidates he's...
He won't wear an orange shirt, so he's a denier?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Eby. To Mr.
The hell kind of logic is that?
Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act was passed by all parties 5 years ago. You say you may repeal it. Is that for certain? Be specific. Under what conditions would you do so?
Thank you, Sachi. When we look at British Columbia and we look at First Nations in British Columbia, they've been held back economically for far too long. We need to be able to unleash their potential. We need to make sure that they can fully participate in the economy. We make sure that economic reconciliation can be a reality. And I've witnessed this firsthand as I signed 435 agreements with First Nations. I witnessed this firsthand when I see the difference it makes to people on the ground and to what's going on in our province. And so my perspective on this and our Conservative Party looks at British Columbia working with First Nations, lifting them up, making sure that we can help fulfill those opportunities for them. And when there is legislation in place that creates friction between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, I think that's wrong. That is not reconciliation. So we need to be able to move beyond that. When you look at the debate in the UN on the United Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, we want to bring that to life in terms of how we work with First Nations. You look at the debate, you look at the intention, that's how we will utilize UNDRIP in British Columbia. DRIPper legislation, the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People Act, has caused friction in this province, and it needs to be replaced with what makes sense so that we are not creating the divisions amongst people, but instead we're making sure that both Indigenous and non-Indigenous life have the opportunity to be able to fully participate and benefit from a growing and expanding economy.
Thank you, Mr. Rustad. To Ms. Firstenow, your platform says Indigenous governments have decision-making authority over their lands. But how do you reconcile this when economically independent First Nations who want to log old growth forests or they want to support pipeline projects?
Yeah, well, for so long in this province, these are the only options that have been given to First Nations. And the kind of economic reconciliation that John Rustad is talking about are the benefits agreements that he entered into with First Nations that were colonial and paternalistic, that identified how the money could be spent if those proceeds went to First Nations.
No,
that ensured
that's just
that First
factually
Nations
incorrect.
couldn't criticize a project, that ensured that the people of those nations couldn't speak out. What we need is to recognize that the courts have been telling governments across Canada, and especially here in BC, that rights and title for First Nations exist, and the courts have been directing governments to do the work to sort that out at a negotiating table, not, as David said, spend millions and tens of millions of dollars on legal fees, fighting battles that the provincial government always loses, because the courts have been consistent on this, and the courts want governments to create certainty, to create consistency, and to ensure that we're doing the hard but essential work of reconciliation with First Nations.
Thank you, Ms. Firstino. And now the same question to all of you, beginning with Mr. Eby. Time and again, the courts have ruled in favor of Aboriginal titles. So when you, as Premier, are in a situation where you are negotiating over what to do with Crown land, which is considered public land, whose interests are you prioritizing?
Well, that's a critically important question, Shachi. Thank you. And the best way I can describe it to you is to talk to you about the agreement we did with the Haida people. You know, recognizing Haida title, everybody knew the government wasn't going to win in court. Haida have been there since time immemorial. They've got their own governance. They've been looking after different functions. And so when we entered into an agreement with the Haida, it was to make sure that we were sitting down as partners at a table with shared responsibility. We're going to work it out. We're not going to go to court. And that's what we did. That's how we got to an agreement with the Haida. And you know, when we went to the legislature, John Rustad stood up, he looked in the eyes of the Haida elders, and he said, yes, this is the right thing to do. I went and I talked to the Attorney General. We never were going to win in court. But then as soon as he got outside the legislature, he hit social media, he said, hey, the Haida are coming for your private property. A total lie, a total fiction, and an example of the kind of divisive politics that our province does not need.
Ms. Firstino.
Well, it's really critical that we create certainty in this province, that it's long-term, and that we recognize, again, what the courts have indicated for us to do and what government should be doing. To politicize this the way that the Conservatives did, and to really not do the work properly, because the NDP did not work with the people of BC, did not demonstrate that. But when you ask whose interests on Crown land are being protected, for so long in this province, Crown land has been handed over for resource extraction by industries, and they have extracted enormous wealth. They have extracted our resources. They have come in and done boom and bust economics over and over again. And whose interests were not protected were the long-term interests of British Columbians. We now have a devastated landscape. We have so much damage that has come, and the wealth has left our province.
Mr. Rustad.
Thank you very much. When you see economic reconciliation on BC, you see both Indigenous and non-Indigenous be able to prosper. And I'll give you the Haisla, for example. They went from 65% unemployment to 15% unemployment. There's so many nations that have engaged economically that have been able to change lives and make that difference for people. And I think, quite frankly, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike want to see that happen on the landscape. I have gone out and I've talked and all the agreements that I've done and seen the difference it makes. And when it comes to Haida, or to the Haida Gwaii and the Haida people, I fully support addressing title. It needed to happen. It's the right thing to do. But private land and infrastructure should never have been put on the table. Not without engaging with the people and making sure that you're in a situation. By coming forward and doing it, ultimately you're going to end up with Indigenous law applying to your private property. We need to make sure that everybody's at the table if you want to achieve true reconciliation.
Okay, time now for open debate. Ms. Firstenow, we begin with you. Mr. Eby, I see you shaking your head. You may
Rustad's
engage
nailing
once
it,
you've
guys.
had a moment to speak.
I gotta say.
It's fascinating to me that John Rustad's vision for this province is one that's rooted somewhere around 1957. I mean, he cannot look ahead because he can only look back. He is so limited in his imagination of what's possible. And when it comes to reconciliation, when it comes to sorting out rights and title, what we have to do, the hard but essential work we have to do, all John Rustad can do is look back to when he was Minister of Indigenous Relations, and what he wanted to do was visit First Nations that had golf courses. He is not seriously taking this issue and recognizing the serious work of a provincial government is not to politicize this, not to make people afraid, but to recognize that to move forward, to create economic certainty, to create economic prosperity for everybody in BC, this issue has to be sorted out.
Well, look at what the Squamish Nation are doing at the foot of the Burrard Street Bridge. You know, this was a reserve property that was stolen from them by the government. The Squamish were kicked off, and that property sat vacant for many years. It was given back by the federal government. What they did was they're building hundreds and hundreds of units of rental housing for the whole community. We all benefit from that. This work actually improves and increases prosperity for everyone. And John wants to say it wants to take something away from you. It wants to take your private property away from you. Nothing could be further from the truth. So there were private property owners from Haida Gwaii, business owners who came to support that because the certainty, knowing the path forward, makes their businesses and their communities more valuable, more prosperous.
Mr. Rustad,
First Nations people are not coming for your backyards.
Thank you. What we need to see in this province is an opportunity for everybody to be able to prosper. There's no question there. That's one of the reasons why, as part of economic reconciliation, we are actually going to look at the the return of land to First Nations people. It needs to happen. This is rights and title. Right title is included. It's Section 35 of our Constitution. So we will be engaging with First Nations, but we want to make sure that what we're doing with First Nations is creating those opportunities for success. I have seen it when I have a young lady that comes to me and says, I'd like to give you a meat offering. And I say, what for? Because you put a program in place that gave me some training. I got my first job. I was living on the street as a single mom. I had my child on the street. I couldn't look after my child. Now I have a job, I'm back doing some training, I have another job, and I just want to say thank you. That is what economic reconciliation is, connecting with people, making sure they have an opportunity to build a future and look after the kids. That's what any parent would want in the province. That's what we need to deliver when we're working with First Nations in BC.
Eby doesn't care about people.
I don't know if I would compare a relationship with First Nations to parent and child. I would compare it as a partnership, as a true partnership. We're working together to build a province here. And when we work together, amazing things happen. You know, some of the most successful projects in this province are joint projects with Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people, and it improves life in the whole community. John, I just can't disagree with you more that your first...
He takes a wholesome moment and turns it into something ridiculous.
Recognize the rights that we know Indigenous people have in this province.
Yeah,
Why would you pick a fight with Indigenous people as one of your first steps? We got to work together
Because
here.
John just wants to take us back to the 20th century. It's where he feels most comfortable. It's where he feels that we should be going. He cannot see a future that's different from the one in the past that he's had. And he cannot see a future that's unlike what the BC Liberals created when he was a cabinet minister in their government. This is a man who lacks imagination, who lacks the capacity to see a better future.
The first thing we'll do as a Conservative government, should we have that honour and the trust of people in this province, is actually to get rid of a lot of the waste and excess that this government is spending money on. They have expanded the budget by 70% and delivered nothing. 7 years and nothing has improved. We need to change course and make sure that we put people first in BC.
Okay, we do have to leave it there and move on to
He's sharp,
our next
man.
theme, which
Rustad
is about the future of
has kept
Columbia.
his composure.
The first question to you, Ms. Firstenow. We're
Phenomenally
living with
throughout
the
this.
effects of climate change every day. Fires, floods, and
Oh
this
my goodness,
summer,
here we go.
no BC grown peaches. At the same time, the reality remains this province relies on resource-based industries. Between 2017 and 2020, your party held up an NDP government. Tell us, what did the BC Greens actually do to transition BC's fiscal future away from fossil fuels?
Yeah, we did have a confidence in supply agreement with the BC NDP, and when they brought forward a piece of legislation to give LNG Canada, at that time, over $6 billion in subsidies, we voted against it. But who voted with them? The BC Liberals. This is where John and David are aligned. They're aligned on subsidizing fossil fuels. They're aligned on building more LNG infrastructure in BC.
Yeah.
They're aligned on continuing to drag us back to a fossil fuel age when the rest of the world is moving forward, when we will not be able to meet our emissions. And it's interesting that David's been asking about which John Rustad. Before he became Premier, David Eby said, we cannot meet our climate targets and continue to build any more fossil fuel infrastructure. But under the NDP, we've gone from 0 LNG facilities to a potential of 7. We have a government that is all in on a fuel that is now proven to be worse than coal, that the International Energy Agency has said will leave BC behind because the demand will be gone. We need a clean energy future for BC, and the only party focused on that, truly, are the BC Greens.
Thank you, Ms. Fursten. Now to you, Mr. Rustad. You've promised a lot of changes that aren't actually under BC jurisdiction. Repealing taxes on tips is federal law. The courts have ruled you can't just clear away homeless camps. And
She is a fossil.
Bring back those plastic straws.
Yeah, bring back the plastic straws. Let's go.
Government alone.
Can we get a couple W's in the chat for plastic straws?
We're very proud of the fact that we just need to get rid of the stuff that sucks in BC. Paper straws suck. I'm sorry, we've got to get rid of those. It doesn't work for people in BC. You know, there's a little meme I saw where there was 2 lines of white powder, supposedly cocaine, and a plastic straw, and the bottom sign said, one of these is illegal in BC. And that to me tells a great story in terms of David Eby's British Columbia. When we look at tips and what has happened in British Columbia, of course we can't impact what's going on the federal side, but we can categorize it and make sure that it's not taxed from a provincial side. And it's easy enough to be able to do that in terms of computer technology today to do it. It's the right thing to do for people who are serving, people who need that extra little boost to make sure we have that sort of money available. These are the types of initiatives we need to do to be able to help people in British Columbia, not to put barriers and struggles in front of people in British Columbia. So we're actually very aggressive in everything that we need to do in this province because things aren't working. It's been 7 years, Mr. Eby, and he has not been able to deliver for people in BC. We need change, and that common sense change is what the Conservatives will deliver for BC.
Mr. Eby, you've spent a lot of time in this campaign, a significant part of your platform talking about John Rustad. Are you more focused on him than your own plans for the next 4 years?
Thanks, Shachi. Not at all. But
Yeah, you are. You're obsessed with
British
them.
Columbians know who's running in the election and what their positions are. John Rustad, he's avoiding debates. He refused to debate on the island. He won't take follow-up questions from reporters. He doesn't get back to media outlets when they ask questions that he doesn't like. Answering questions is not optional if you're applying for the top job in British Columbia. John, you got to answer the questions. And when you're a climate change denier, when you say that the science behind climate change, the same science that's predicting this massive hurricane off the coast of Florida, is false, that it's a hoax,
politicizing
people have been tricked.
hurricane.
How do you lead a province whose massive advantage is clean electricity? Some of the lowest carbon products available. Sonia says no fossil fuel development at all. I say if it's net zero by 2030, lifting up Indigenous people like Chief Smith and the Haisla, then we can do it. John says let her rip. We got to be better than that. This isn't about plastic straws. That's the least we can do to tell our kids that we're moving in the right direction. Developing our electricity and hydrogen, it's the path forward.
Okay, thank you. Same question to all of you, beginning with Mr. Rustad. You all know the financial situation the province is in. Each of you has a platform filled with expensive promises, new bridges, SkyTrain expansions, and a lot more. How are you going to pay for it? Mr. Rustad.
Thanks very much. There's no question we need to get our economy going in British Columbia. We have seen the fact that British Columbia is almost cut in half in terms of our economic performance under the NDP over the last 7 years versus what it was prior to that. We have seen almost zero private sector job growth in British Columbia. We're running And now, if David Eby gets in, $24 billion worth of deficits over the next 3 years. This is unaffordable in BC. We need to unleash the potential of this province. We have our forest sector that is in shambles. 2/3 of it's been lost. We have to get the feet back under the forest sector. We have 17 mines that need to be opened up. It takes 2 years in Sweden to open a mine. It takes 12 to 15 years in BC. We've got to get this red tape out of the way. We have to make sure that our economy can get humming. We have to make sure we clear out this bureaucracy and red tape as part of it so that we can generate the revenue we need. We're going to make strategic investments. We're going to continue to make those strategic investments, but we have to be able to get that economy going to be able to afford it.
Mr. Eby.
Well, I mean, there was a lot there. Look, British Columbia is the fastest growing province economically of any of the big provinces since we formed government, since the pandemic, and last calendar year. We're growing faster than the other big provinces. But until you feel at home, that reality that we're growing doesn't matter. That's why it's good that we have the fastest growing wages, one of the lowest unemployment rates, and actually, contrary to what John just said, we're one of the leaders in Canada in private sector job creation. But we got to keep going. And we've got to make sure that people have the chance to get the training to take those jobs. You know, I met a young man who he was moving boxes around in a warehouse for $20 an hour. He got a welding course, an apprenticeship. Now his top wage is $62 an hour. That's why we're doubling apprenticeships in the province, to give people the chance to build a good life for themselves and their family.
Thank you, Mr. Eby. Ms. Firstenow.
I remember the conversations during COVID in 2020 where we talked about building back better, where we talked about a more fair economy, where we talked about addressing the growing inequality and the growing gap between the rich and the poor. And yet, in the 4 years since then, we've seen that gap widen. We've seen inequality become a bigger problem. We've seen deep poverty become a bigger problem. There was a panel that had Mary Polak, Bowen Ma, and me, all three parties agreeing that we have to find a way to tax wealth. And that's what we're proposing in our platform. A 18% tax on profits over $1 billion. A 0.2% increase on school tax on properties over $3 million. And a 12.5% marginal tax on incomes over $350,000. And then taxing all assets, all real estate assets, looking at that whole wealth and making sure we're capturing that wealth and taxing it properly.
Thank you, Ms. Firstenow. To open debate, you're first, Mr. Eby.
Well, I think it's a prerequisite. Frankly, I think it should have been a prerequisite to walk into this room, that you have a costed platform. Now, yeah, government budgets are under pressure right now, just like household budgets. We're at the bottom of the economic cycle. But we're not going to make people pay for that. They need support now. That's why we're expanding programs for people. And we're making sure that, you know, with our costed platform, you see declining deficits over time. We're going to return to balance. But we're not going to make you pay for it. John, you haven't released a costed platform. An economist at UBC says your platform is written in pixie dust. Can you at least be honest with British Columbians? What are you going to cut? How deep are the cuts going to be in the review that you've proposed? And I know you've started with childcare for the middle class, getting rid of support for them. But what else is on the chopping block in the Rustad administration?
Sonia, first of all, thanks very much. And $24 billion is not responsible. They have no hope at all to get back to a budget. They have no hope whatsoever to get back to a balanced budget. But here's another thing that David Eby and his government has done. They have put the cart before the horse. They're promising to do things like net zero by 2030. They're promising to do heat pumps. They're promising to do electric cars, but we don't have electrical generation. Last year, almost 20% of the electricity we actually needed had to come from outside of borders, from things like natural gas and coal-fired. We need to do significant investments in our power generation ability in this.
Look at Eby, he's panicking.
That he has ignored as a government to be able to make sure that we can actually come close to.
So is the Green Party.
But the key piece in my mind is when 1 in 2 youth are thinking about leaving this province, if we do not get our economy going, those people will leave here. That's a brain drain, but most importantly, as parents want their children to stay close to home. They want to see a future for them.
We've had generations of...
What is wrong with these people? They are tripping out and short-circuiting on live television when Rustad's talking.
Themselves have given rebates that have amounted to over billions of dollars. Instead of spending that money on ways to systemically solve problems. You know, it would be really helpful for people if there was transit available. Per capita, people spend $10,000 to own and operate a vehicle. If they had the option of available, frequent, fast, and free transit, that could save people $10,000 a year. People want to know that a healthcare system is there for them. People want to know that their kids are getting an excellent education system. People want mental health care. People want infrastructure. People want affordable housing. Tax cuts and rebates are a way that politicians and political parties try to woo people during elections, and then they turn their back on them for the 4 years after that election and fail to deliver what people need that will actually make their lives more secure and more affordable.
Well, I think, Sonia's clear, and that's the discipline of a costed platform. She's going to increase taxes on certain groups. That's her plan.
For the wealthy.
And
for the
I'm clear.
wealthiest
I
in
understand,
the
Sonia. I understand. For us, we have a costed platform that includes immediate support for you and your family, for the middle class. But John, you said a lot there. But the one thing you studiously avoided saying was where your costed platform. How can we debate you when you won't even say what you're going to cut? Are you cutting health care? Cutting childcare? You said you're doing a review. We've seen this movie before when you were in government.
$3.8 billion to healthcare funding over time. David Eby keeps on calling it a lie. But here's something David Eby is not telling you he's going to do. He's going to double your carbon tax over the
How pulled the carbon tax?
He is going to double
committed to get rid of the carbon tax.
They're both getting rid of the carbon tax. That's
Sonia.
Half the people in this province
Get rid of it.
to put food on the table and pay their rent. And his goal is to tax you even further into poverty.
This is
Taxing
the worst
people
kind
in
of
poverty
diversion.
is
John,
not
where
going to
is your
change the
costed
weather,
platform?
Mr. Eby. Taxing people in the
Where's
weather
your
is
costed
not
platform?
going to change the weather. And we will be
Costed
releasing
platform
The Green Party's about to have an aneurysm.
development to make sure we can pay for these.
Look at her.
This is why we're stuck in the 20th century.
And this is where we have to wrap this section of the debate. We have time now
What
for
the
a
fuck
final
are we
round,
watching?
which will not be a debate. I want each of your answers individually. People who vote for opposing
Oh, my
candidates
goodness.
are often friends, colleagues, even spouses in the same household. But at times, each of your campaign's rhetoric has cast the other side as woke, fragile, extreme, or yes, even weird. I would invite you all now to take a moment to personally reflect. Tell us how you yourselves have contributed to an increasingly polarized political climate. And most importantly, help us understand why you're doing that. We will start with Mr. Eby.
Well, I regret that we're having to have a debate about a bunch of very polarizing topics. These are topics that used to be settled for British Columbians for a generation. Climate change is real. Vaccines work. We don't call gay people groomers. We respect people. We respect Indigenous people. We don't promote hate and division.
You don't.
And I regret that
You
I
don't
have
call
to
gay
continually
people
talk about
rumors?
because John Rustad has fielded candidates that promote these views that he himself also seems to hold some of these.
What the hell does that even mean?
I would much rather be talking about the fact that he doesn't have a costed platform. The fact that our tax benefit for people is available immediately, that we're building affordable housing. I don't want to be talking about this stuff. I want to talk about what matters to you at home, but it's important that you know who's on his team, who the next health minister could be, who's making decisions about what your kids learn in school. This is important information, and I regret that we have to talk about it.
Mr. Rustad.
Thank you very much. We've been actually clear in this campaign that we are talking about the issues. We're talking about the solutions. We're talking about the fact that people are dying on our streets. We're talking about the fact that our healthcare system is collapsing. We're talking about the fact that our economy is in shambles. We're talking about the fact that crime is running rampant. These are the things that the people are concerned about. David Eby wants to talk about conspiracy theories and anything but what's actually going on because he cannot defend his government's policy. 7 years, can anybody say that anything is better in British Columbia?
No.
Is anything better? Certainly, I haven't been able to find.
We're turning into one of the worst provinces.
Conservative government,
unfortunately,
we're trying to bring common sense change to British Columbia so that we can unleash the potential of our economy, so that we can make sure people can have a good paying job, that people can have a roof over their head, put food on the table, look after their kids, and their kids can look optimistically about being able to have a future in British Columbia, not looking out the window and seeing people lying on a street.
Ms. Furstenau.
I've really worked hard and been determined in this election to focus on solutions for people, to offer a well-being framework as a way to measure the work of government, to ensure that we're talking about reality and the solutions that we have to some really challenging and complex problems. Polarization is increased in two-party systems. Polarizations happens when parties have to define each other as the opposite of one another. We lose the common ground. The least polarized we were in BC was during the minority government from 2017 to 2020, when we worked together. Particularly in response to the global pandemic, it was recognized that we were a province that could work together because we'd been doing that for 3 years. If we want less polarization, if we want more focus on solutions, we have to get away from a winner-takes-all two-party system. We have to elect enough Greens to prevent that from happening.
Leaders, we're running out of time. It is time for closing statements. Each of you will have a minute. There was a draw. According to the draw, Ms. Firstino,
This chick is weird.
We have so much incredible
The host, but so is
potential
Green
in this
Party.
province. We have people who are innovators, who are dreamers, who are entrepreneurs, young people who want to be part of the solutions to the big challenges we face, who want to go to university, become tradespeople, build the BC that is possible, a BC of clean energy, a BC of fairness and more equality, a BC where people aren't left behind, left to sleep on the street. We have so many solutions that we could be implementing, and yet our politics and our governance gets caught up in exactly this, in the polarization, in the pointing fingers, and in not acknowledging the reality of where we're at. In this election, electing more Greens, ensuring we don't give all the power to either of these parties is the way to move us forward as a province in a way that puts you, the people of BC, first.
Mr. Eby.
Thanks. If you're watching at home right now, it's not because there's nothing else on TV. It's because you care about this place, our amazing home. Sonia's right. The thing that makes British Columbia amazing is the people of British Columbia. And they need support right now. People are hurting. And that's our focus, is to make sure we're supporting British Columbians with a chance to own a home. 300,000 middle-income homes across the province, with the health care they deserve, making sure we're getting those doctors and nurses off of the sidelines and into our hospitals, delivering care in our communities, more family doctors for people, making sure our communities are safe and responsive to the needs of you and your family. The people who are struggling in our streets are cared for in a compassionate way, and they get the care that they need. Now, John Rustad wants to throw that all away. We can't govern through conspiracy theories, cuts, and divisiveness. We only solve this together, and I'm committed to work for you until the job is done.
Mr. Rustad.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank the listeners, thank the viewers for participating, for seeing this night, for watching, and for caring about British Columbia. I care deeply about this province, too. I care about the fact that our youth want to be able to have a future here. I care about the fact that our youth want to be able to have safety here. You know, we have a government that kicks out a Jewish cabinet minister, Selena Robinson, to appease a mob who last night was burning flags in front of the art gallery. I find that incredibly offensive.
Yeah.
In British Columbia, we want to make sure we build that
What did they
positive
say?
opportunity for people to have that
Death
future.
to Canadians.
That's why our entire plan is about putting you first, whether it's healthcare and patients first, whether it's our economy and making sure you can build a job, whether it is the investments that are needed for infrastructure. I'm a proud Canadian, and I can tell you the Conservative Party of British Columbia will bring forward a common sense plan that will deliver real prosperity for everyone here in British Columbia. Thank you for watching this evening.
Okay, leaders, thank you.
Beauty.
Thank you for a respectful debate this evening. On behalf of the Broadcast Consortium, we hope you at home
John, tell Eby to go fuck himself.
educated as you get to know the leaders, the parties, and their platforms. Election Day is October 19th. You can vote in advance starting this.
You're standing on the sacred land of Sugon D's nuts. David Eby, you must announce what land you're standing on. All right, folks, that wraps up the debate. What a shit show. Absolute shit show. I mean, Rustad was phenomenal. And look, I would be very quick to the punch if he wasn't phenomenal. I did meet him in person. I went to one of his rallies, and I like the guy. He seems very personable. He listens. He can relate to people. He doesn't give you that cookie cutter textbook political nonsense. He's a real dude. And this is kind of the whole conservative movement right now, is it's real people that are elected that wear suits and ties, right? So real people that just wear fancy clothes that are going to be running our towns, running our provinces, and running our country. And I don't know about you guys, but that's something that I'm excited to vote for. Something that I'm excited to vote for the first time, right? Because I've never voted. And John, I'm proud that I will be voting for you as my first ever vote, or I guess in your favor. But nonetheless, folks, educated. Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing lots of different buzzwords down in the chat, right? Respectful, educated, conservative. That was awesome. That was a good time. Don't normally do provincial stuff, but I'm glad that we did. We're going to wrap it up, though. I haven't really spent a whole lot of time with the family today, so I'm going to go out and do that. Sprocker with the $2. EB is a beta. Yeah, that's you're exactly right. And Deborah with the $2.79. Good luck, BC. Wishing you a blue wave. Thank you very much, Deborah. Yeah, blue wave it is, folks. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys tomorrow morning for question period. Bye for now. Enjoy the rest of your evening.